There are moments in life that look like disasters, but are actually disguised awakenings. You didn't stumble into the narcissist's life by chance. You were placed there, intentionally, purposefully, by a universe that saw the greatness inside you long before you could see it yourself. The betrayal, the manipulation, the confusion. They were not senseless cruelty. They were the instruments of your awakening. They were the fire that burned away everything false, so that what was real, what was eternal in you, could finally rise. Today I am going to tell you the truth most people will never dare to say out loud. You were never the victim of the narcissist's presence. You were the chosen one meant to break free. And once you see why, once you understand the sacred assignment hidden inside your suffering, you will never look at your past the same way again. Lean in, because what you're about to discover will not just shock you, it will set you on fire with the kind of freedom that nothing and no one can ever take away again. You were chosen to awaken, not to suffer. It is easy to believe, standing amidst the wreckage of betrayal, that you simply wandered into the hands of a narcissist by some cruel accident of fate. But the deeper truth is far more profound. You were placed there, not to suffer, but to awaken. Before the storm, before the confusion, before the long nights questioning your own sanity, you carried within you something rare and radiant. You possessed a heart capable of deep love, loyalty fierce enough to weather storms, and a generosity so pure that you continued giving even when it cost you pieces of yourself. This was never weakness. This was light, the kind of light that narcissists are drawn to, not because they admire it, but because they seek to control what they cannot create. The narcissist did not choose you because you lacked value. They chose you because your soul overflowed with it. But you, shaped by years of conditioning, by a culture that praises compliance over courage, by a history that taught silence over self-respect, did not yet know how to protect your sacred essence. Life, seeing this imbalance, orchestrated a collision, not as cruelty, not as punishment, but as mercy. The narcissist entered your life as a storm meant to uproot every false belief you held about yourself, beliefs so deeply embedded that only the violence of betrayal could force them to the surface. Before the encounter, you may have thought you knew your worth, but it was a fragile knowing, conditional, easily shaken by disapproval or abandonment. You thought love was something to earn, that peace came from pleasing others, that safety was found in making yourself smaller. The narcissist did not implant these lies. They exposed them. They became the mirror you did not want but desperately needed, a mirror reflecting all the silent agreements you had made with a life that demanded your silence in exchange for belonging. You were not placed in the narcissist's path to be diminished. You were placed there to awaken to the magnitude of your own worth. The betrayal you endured was not a verdict against your value. It was the beginning of your liberation from every structure, every narrative, every wound that had ever told you otherwise. Comfort would not have delivered you here. Gentle encouragement would not have shattered the illusions you lived under. It required an earthquake. It required fire. It required the raw and brutal breaking apart of a life built on quiet suffering, so that a new life, founded on truth and self-respect, could rise in its place. Even now, even in the aftermath, you must understand you were never being punished. You were being called to remember who you were before the world convinced you to forget, called to reclaim what was never meant to be surrendered, called to rise not as a reaction to the narcissist's destruction, but as the inevitable unfolding of your true design. You were not created to survive by minimizing yourself. You were created to thrive by embodying the full measure of your sacred worth. And sometimes, to remember that truth, life must first dismantle every lie you have believed about what you deserve. You were placed in their life and they in yours because something in you was ready to wake up. Something in you was ready to stop settling. Something in you was ready to burn down every false altar built to please others and rebuild your life on the unshakable foundation of self-worth and divine purpose. You did not stumble into the fire. You were led through it, because the version of you that is emerging on the other side is far too powerful to have been born any other way. And once you awaken to the truth of who you are, another revelation follows, that the pain you endured was never senseless. It was, in fact, the very tool life used to redirect your path. Let's go deeper. Pain was never your punishment. It was your pivot. Pain has a way of convincing us that we are cursed. When betrayal cuts deep and love turns into a battlefield, it is tempting to believe that suffering is proof that we are somehow unworthy, that we must have failed in some hidden, irredeemable way. But the truth, the sacred, life-altering truth, is that pain was never your punishment. Pain was your pivot. It was the axis upon which your life began to turn, shifting you away from cycles that could no longer hold the weight of who you were meant to become. Before the narcissist entered your life, there were already fractures beneath the surface, fractures formed by years of unmet needs, by moments when you silenced yourself to be accepted, by relationships where your light was too often seen as a threat rather than a gift. Those fractures were not your fault. They were the natural result of a world that often teaches survival over self-respect, compliance over courage. Left unaddressed, those silent wounds would have continued to shape your choices, pulling you into spaces where you were tolerated but never truly celebrated. And so life, in its unrelenting mercy, sent a force so disruptive, so undeniable, that you could no longer pretend everything was fine. The narcissist's chaos was not random cruelty. It was a siren blaring through the quiet compromise you had made with yourself. Their manipulation, their gaslighting, their cruelty, these were not punishments. They were alarms, warnings that the foundation you were standing on was cracked, unstable, unable to support the magnitude of the soul within you. Pain became the language life used when whispers and signs no longer worked. It became the force strong enough to shake you free from a life too small for your spirit. Every tear you shed, every sleepless night, every moment you questioned your own sanity, they were not wasted. They were sacred milestones along the road back to yourself. The heartbreak was not the end of your story. It was the doorframe you had to walk through to enter a life where you no longer negotiated your worth. Without the devastation, you would have stayed. You would have tolerated. You would have shrunk. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you would have disappeared beneath the expectations and needs of everyone but yourself. But pain refused to let you vanish. Pain demanded that you remember. Pain, fierce and unrelenting, dragged you back to your own side. It forced you to confront the places inside where you had accepted less than what you deserved, not because you were unworthy, but because you had forgotten how worthy you always were. It exposed the internal agreements you made long ago, the silent contracts where you traded your voice for belonging, your boundaries for affection, your peace for the illusion of love. And in exposing them, pain gave you the extraordinary gift of choice. You were never cursed. You were never forgotten. You were being redirected, reforged, reborn. The narcissist did not succeed in destroying you. They accidentally succeeded in awakening you. They became the unwilling catalyst for your transformation. Through their betrayal, you were handed back the pen you had long surrendered, and with trembling hands you began to write a new story. A story no longer dictated by fear or scarcity, but anchored in truth, dignity, and radical self-love. And now, standing at this sacred crossroads, life invites you to pivot fully, not just away from the narcissist, but away from every internalized belief that ever told you that you were too much, too needy, too broken. To pivot toward a life where love feels safe, where peace is your default, and where you no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. This pivot is not easy. It will cost you the comfort of familiarity. It will cost you the relationships built on your silence. It will cost you the old identity that survived by shrinking. But what you gain in return is priceless. Your voice, your joy, your freedom, your destiny. And today I ask you, not as someone issuing a challenge, but as someone bearing witness to your becoming, are you ready to pivot fully into the life you were always meant to live? Are you ready to choose the path that your pain has been pointing you toward all along? The path back to yourself? If your soul feels the call, comment below, "I'm ready to pivot into my true life." Declare it. Own it. Let heaven and earth bear witness to the day you chose yourself, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. Yet, even as pain reshaped your steps, it exposed something deeper. Not just the betrayal you endured, but the ancient wound within you that had long gone unseen. And now, it's time to face what was hidden. The wound was already there, the narcissist just exposed it. Long before the narcissist entered your life, the wound already lived within you. It was not loud. It was not obvious. It sat quietly beneath the surface of your successes, your smiles, your well-ordered life, whispering lies so familiar that you mistook them for truth, lies that said you had to earn love, lies that said your needs were too much, lies that told you being chosen meant sacrificing yourself. These wounds were not born in adulthood. They were seeded in childhood, watered by the hands of neglect, perfectionism, conditional affection, or unspoken expectations that taught you love was something fragile, fleeting, and dependent upon your performance. You adapted. You survived. You became who you needed to be to feel safe, to feel accepted. And in doing so, you learned to silence your own alarms, to distrust your own instincts, to confuse chaos with connection. By the time the narcissist appeared, the patterns were already in place. You were primed to explain away bad behavior, to make excuses for cruelty, to believe that if you just tried harder, loved deeper, endured longer, you could finally earn the love that always seemed just out of reach. The narcissist did not create these patterns. They simply activated them. They did not plant the wound, they located it. They pressed against it until you could no longer pretend it did not exist. They mirrored back to you every unresolved fear, every unhealed ache, every place within you where you still believed you had to prove your worth. Their manipulation was not random. It was a calculated dance, drawing you deeper into the cycle of self-betrayal you had been taught was normal. They mirrored your ache for validation, your hunger for safety, your desperate hope that this time, if you gave enough, you would finally be enough. At first, the narcissist seemed like the answer to your prayers. They saw you, or at least pretended to, in ways no one else had. They mirrored your dreams, echoed your values, made you feel, perhaps for the first time in a long time, profoundly understood. But it was an illusion, a strategy, a bait laid perfectly across the open wound, luring you in not to heal you, but to feed on the very ache you had spent a lifetime trying to silence. And yet, even in this deception, life was working for you. Even in the manipulation, there was a deeper mercy. Because once the mask fell, once the chaos became impossible to explain away, once the lies tangled too tightly to ignore, you were faced with a choice. Continue the cycle or finally break it. Without the narcissist's exploitation, you might have gone another decade denying the wound existed. You might have continued building a life around managing pain rather than healing it. Their betrayal, as devastating as it was, stripped away your ability to pretend. It forced you to confront the silent agreements you had made with suffering. This is why the healing work after narcissistic abuse is so profound. It is not just about recovering from what they did. It is about recognizing what inside of you allowed them access in the first place. It is about reclaiming the places where you lost yourself long before they arrived. It is about tracing the wound back to its roots, refusing to carry forward the lies that were never yours to bear. Healing is not a process of fixing what is broken. It is a process of remembering what was true before the wound ever formed. You were always enough. You were always worthy. You were always whole. The narcissist's cruelty did not change that. It only revealed how far you had been pulled from your original truth. And now, in the aftermath, you are being invited not just to patch the surface, not just to manage the pain, but to excavate it all, to pull out the lies at their root, to refuse to build another relationship, another life, on a foundation cracked by self-abandonment. There is nothing more sacred, more revolutionary than facing the place where you first believed you had to earn love and declaring, with the authority of your own healing, that you will no longer live that way. The narcissist, in their destruction, inadvertently handed you the mirror that shows you where your deepest work lies. They are not the villain in a story that ends with your devastation. They are the catalyst in a story that culminates with your liberation. Their betrayal uncovered what needed healing, but the healing itself, the transformation, the triumph, that is your work. That is your legacy. And it is a legacy they can never touch, diminish, or define. Recognizing the wound was only the beginning. True transformation demanded even more. It called you to break the generational patterns that birthed the wound in the first place. Let's walk into that calling together. You were chosen to break the cycle, not just for you, but for those after you. There are moments in life when the weight you carry is not only your own. Beneath your scars, beneath your battles, there is a history written long before you took your first breath. A history of wounds passed down quietly through generations, through whispered fears, through silent sacrifices. You did not create the cycles of pain you found yourself trapped in, but you were chosen to end them. Your encounter with the narcissist was not an isolated accident. It was a sacred assignment. You were placed at the intersection of old patterns and new possibilities, called not only to survive, but to become the one who finally said, "This stops with me." For so long, dysfunction was normalized. Emotional abandonment was called love. Walking on eggshells was seen as loyalty. Swallowing your voice, suppressing your needs, sacrificing your peace, these were praised as virtues, as evidence of being a good daughter, a good partner, a good friend. And you, shaped by this invisible legacy, did what you thought you had to do to earn acceptance. You stayed silent when your soul screamed. You tolerated what should have been unacceptable. You rationalized what should have been confronted. You called survival love, because you did not yet know another language. The narcissist's entry into your life was not just about personal heartbreak, it was about collective healing. Their manipulation, their exploitation, their cruelty, they shone a spotlight on the very systems of belief that had kept you and those before you trapped. They made the cost of staying silent too high. They made the ache of staying small too unbearable. Their chaos forced into the open every hidden agreement you had made with your own diminishment, every inherited story that told you suffering was noble, that endurance was love, that losing yourself was necessary for connection. And so you began, often without even realizing it, the most courageous work a human soul can undertake, breaking generational patterns. When you said no to manipulation, you said no for every woman who had been told to stay quiet. When you walked away from emotional chaos, you walked away for every child who grew up believing they had to earn affection. When you chose yourself, even through trembling hands and tear-stained nights, you chose for a lineage that had been waiting for someone brave enough to choose differently. This work is not glamorous. It is not applauded. It often feels lonely and raw. Breaking cycles means grieving not only what you lost, but what you never received. It means mourning the tenderness you deserved but were denied. It means facing the ache of absence, the longing for nurturing, the deep guttural yearning to have been loved without condition, and learning how to give those things to yourself instead of chasing them in broken places. It means standing alone where others surrendered to comfort. It means becoming fiercely committed to a new way of living, even when it feels foreign, even when it costs you relationships built on your compliance. But the impact of this work ripples beyond your own life. Every time you set a boundary, you teach those around you that peace is worth protecting. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you create space for others to do the same. Every time you refuse to tolerate mistreatment disguised as love, you dismantle the lie that suffering is the price of belonging. You rewrite the blueprint of what connection is supposed to feel like. Safe, honoring, mutual. You are not just healing for yourself. You are healing for every version of you that was told to settle. You are healing for the child who stayed quiet. You are healing for the teenager who bent themselves into shapes to be chosen. You are healing for the adult who believed love meant losing yourself. You are healing for the ancestors who never had the chance, and for the descendants who will now live in the freedom your courage created. This is why it had to be you. Not because you were the weakest link, but because you were the strongest. Because within you lived the capacity not just to endure the fire, but to be transformed by it. Because within you burned a light that refused to be extinguished, even when everything around you demanded it. Because you carried the strength to look at generations of normalized pain and say, I will not pass this on. You were placed in the narcissist's life and they in yours, because the story needed a new ending. And you, even in your moments of doubt and fear, are writing that ending every day you choose truth over silence, healing over hiding, love over fear. You are the cycle breaker, the history shifter, the beginning of a new legacy built not on survival, but on freedom. And that is a revolution no narcissist, no wound, no past can ever undo. And as you rise to break the chains of the past, a final truth emerges, the most important of all, that love was never a transaction you had to earn. It was always the essence you were born to carry. Let's uncover it fully. You were never meant to earn love. You were meant to embody it. One of the most devastating lies you were taught, whether through experience, omission, or silent expectation, was the belief that love must be earned, that love is a prize reserved for the best performers, the most self-sacrificing souls, the ones willing to bend, shrink, and abandon themselves to hold on to connection. This lie did not originate with you. It was handed down quietly through generations, through 1,000 unspoken moments where love was withheld until the right conditions were met. Compliance, perfection, invisibility. When you encountered the narcissist, this hidden belief was already woven into the fabric of your heart. You didn't recognize their demands for what they were, exploitation, because somewhere deep inside, part of you still believed that suffering was the price of belonging. Part of you still thought that if you just loved harder, gave more, endured longer, You could finally secure the kind of unconditional acceptance you had always craved. The narcissist didn't create this ache. They simply exploited it. At first, they mirrored everything you hoped for. They saw your beauty, your dreams, your longing to be truly known, or so it seemed. In truth, they studied your soul to learn where the openings were, where approval could be dangled like a carrot, where affection could be weaponized, where your need for connection could be twisted into control. They did not love you, they loved your willingness to work for love. They loved your readiness to hand over your soul piece by piece in exchange for scraps of attention. And yet, even here, life was conspiring for your freedom. The narcissist's betrayal was not proof of your inadequacy. It was the brutal unveiling of a system you could no longer afford to believe. Their inability to truly love you became the undeniable evidence that love based on performance is not love at all. It is manipulation. It is survivalism dressed up as devotion. And when the mask finally slipped, when their words no longer matched their actions, when their affection became conditional, punishing, cruel, it forced you to confront the sacred truth you had buried beneath years of striving. You were never meant to earn love. You were meant to embody it. You are love. In your breathing, in your being, in your existence, without effort, you are already worthy of connection. Real love, the kind that heals, the kind that honors, cannot be earned. It must be received. It must be allowed. It must be recognized as something intrinsic, something that was placed inside of you by the very hands that fashioned the stars. The narcissist's great failure was never about you. It was about their inability to see what was always whole, always radiant, always enough. Their betrayal broke the illusion that love is a wage to be worked for. It shattered the lie that you have to become smaller, quieter, less complicated to deserve belonging. It forced you to wrestle with the discomfort of being loved not for what you do, but for who you are. And though that wrestling is painful, though it shakes the very foundations of your identity, it also liberates you in ways comfort never could. Because now you know that peace is not boring, it is sacred. You know that stability is not weakness, it is strength. You know that love should feel like coming home, not walking on a minefield. You know that your emotions are not liabilities, they are signals of truth. You know that your needs are not burdens, they are blueprints for intimacy. You know that your worth is not measured by your ability to endure mistreatment, but by your decision to no longer accept it. This is the great shift, the irreversible transformation. No longer will you chase those who cannot see your value. No longer will you perform for those who cannot appreciate your soul. No longer will you trade your authenticity for scraps of attention. You will sit in your wholeness. You will abide in your own worth. You will trust that love, real love, will recognize you not because you have earned it, but because you already are it. You were never broken. You were never too much. You were never too complicated to love. You simply lived too long under the weight of a lie that told you otherwise. But now the lie has been exposed. Now the wound has been named, and now the story is yours to write. A story not of endless striving, but of quiet, radiant belonging. Starting first with yourself. Everything you endured was never meant to be the final chapter. It was the opening act to a far greater story, the story of your return to yourself. The narcissist's betrayal, the collapse of illusions, the exposure of ancient wounds, the breaking of generational chains. All of it was designed not to destroy you, but to deliver you into a life where you no longer apologize for existing, where you no longer negotiate your worth, where you no longer confuse endurance with love. You were placed in that storm to awaken to your strength. You were pressed against the jagged edges of pain to pivot toward your true path. You were forced to see the wounds you once buried, so that you could finally heal them at their root. You were chosen to break the cycle that had whispered lies into your bloodline for generations. And above all, you were summoned to remember that love was never something you had to earn. Love is who you are. It is the breath in your lungs, the fire in your spirit, the divine imprint stitched into your soul, long before this world tried to make you forget it. This healing, this rising, it is not a linear journey. Some days you will feel like a conqueror. Other days you will feel like you are crawling through the ashes. Both are holy. Both are proof that you are living awake. Healing is not about erasing the past. It is about reclaiming your power to define what comes next. It is about choosing again and again to build a life where peace is non-negotiable, where love is sacred, where your soul no longer begs for scraps because it feasts daily on the knowledge of its own worth. You were not placed in a narcissist's life to be diminished. You were placed there because your light was strong enough to survive even their darkness. And now, standing on the other side of devastation, you are more than a survivor. You are a creator, a builder, a bearer of a new story. One that no longer repeats the mistakes of the past, but forges a future grounded in truth, honor, dignity, and sacred self-respect. The pain was real, the betrayal was real, but the triumph is even more real, and it belongs to you. It always has. You are not what happened to you. You are what you chose to become in the aftermath. So walk forward, not with bitterness, but with blazing clarity. Walk forward, not as someone who merely survived, but as someone who transcended. Walk forward as the living proof that no amount of darkness can extinguish a soul that chooses to rise. And remember this truth, now and always. You were never abandoned. You are being reborn.